With the NFL season approaching, Madden 24 is now here, and I'll be breaking down the top 7 teams that I'm recommending for franchise mode rebuilding this year. And there are many teams you could consider that I'm not talking about today, but these are the 7 teams that I've narrowed down, and there's even a couple honorable mentions, so a lot of teams to get through in this video. They're not the 7 worst teams in the NFL. There are different types of rebuilds in this list, and certain players like to focus on rebuilding certain parts of teams or want different challenges. So let's get into it, beginning with a more traditional rebuild choice. We have the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals were 4-13 last year, finishing last place in the NFC West, and lost their last 7 games, only winning a single game at home. Man, this team is in a tough spot heading into the year, especially if you want to replicate the injury that Kyler Murray suffered, and I don't know when he's expected to really come back from that. But assuming you want to build around Kyler Murray, he's already on a massive contract, and he's a good quarterback in Madden, but maybe not a great one at 79 overall. There are some playmakers in this offense that I like a lot. There's Hollywood Brown, who I think is more than just a deep threat. James Conner's a good running back, but it's just not a lot to work with. They did select Paris Johnson in the first round this year, so they could have a really good tackle for the future, and it's nice to have those players in place. Now, the defense is where things get really scary. This is by far the worst defensive line in the game. The secondary gives you some hope at safety, but not so much at corner. Budda Baker is this defense's best player, a versatile safety who can play in the slot, and someone who plays an important role but can't solve all the problems. Isaiah Simmons, super fun player to play with. I've developed him in the last Madden, and he's a player you could play at safety, linebacker, move him around, and be creative. But outside of a few players, you're going to be having to replace almost everything. So if you like drafting for defense, this is your team. And because of the trade that allowed the Texans to move up for Will Anderson, they own the Texans' first-round pick in 2024. Does anyone expect the Texans to be good this year? You can get jump-started on your rebuild pretty quickly, and outside of Kyler Murray and DJ Humphries, there isn't a lot of money tied up into future years. So you get a quarterback that you can use right away, granted he's on a massive contract, but every single position group has needs for the future. The second team is the Houston Texans, and they'll be linked with the Cardinals here as two of the weaker rosters in the NFL. And, of course, their first-round pick belongs to Arizona. The Texans had the worst record in the NFL last year and failed to win a single home game, by the way. But they do have some hope now in drafting a young quarterback in C.J. Stroud. There must have been an injury, too, here, so at left tackle, Laramie Tunsil would be there, and he's the best left tackle in the game, I'm pretty sure. So that gives you a starting point. C.J. Stroud has solid accuracies, might not have the strongest arm, but he's got plenty to work with as you build this Texans offense. At receiver, you'd like to have a little bit more. Nico Collins maybe hasn't developed as quickly as they would like. There is one hidden development receiver, though, in the rookie Tank Dell, and I thought he looked really intriguing in the Texans' first preseason game. So there's one player you definitely want to use early and often. At running back, there is Dameon Pierce, who's going to be your power back, and with 93 break tackle, he'll be a pretty good option there. And then Devin Singletary. I think Pierce is the one that should get the most carries in this offense. And then defensively, they drafted a couple intriguing players last year and then added to that, getting aggressive and moving up for Will Anderson from Alabama. Finding a dominant edge rusher is a great way to start rebuilding this defense. There's also Derek Stingley, who they took last season, but obviously there's still a ton of needs across this defense, and the offense doesn't have a whole lot of established franchise players there either. They've got some standouts at some key positions, but otherwise a whole lot of rebuilding to do. Now, while they're missing their own first-round pick, they do own Cleveland's, Probably part of why they were okay parting with their original. So you will have cap space and a first-round pick in your first offseason, but this is certainly a multi-year endeavor to get the Houston Texans competitive again. We're going to stay in the AFC South with this next team and talk about the Indianapolis Colts. So we've already covered two of the weaker rosters in the NFL. The Colts are a step above that. Maybe a couple steps. They have some really good offensive linemen, Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor. But the reason they made this list is because of Anthony Richardson. He is a really unique quarterback. He was the most athletic ever at the NFL Combine, a rocket arm with great speed, but obviously needs to develop, and there's some players to make that process easier. One of the better running backs in the NFL in Jonathan Taylor will help out. Unlike many teams, you've got pretty good offensive linemen at nearly every position. This certainly shouldn't be as difficult as playing with some of these other teams, but developing Anthony Richardson and trying to build an offense in the high-powered AFC, to me, is one of the most fun things to look at in rebuilds. That's how I spent my time in Madden 23. Anthony Richardson gives you a player to build around as you try to go and compete with Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence. Like, the AFC is so loaded. You might look at a team and think they don't need to be rebuilt that much, but to be Super Bowl caliber in the AFC, it takes a lot. Defensively, I think there's some things to like about this team, but it certainly needs more. DeForest Buckner is awesome, and Grover Stewart next to him is a high-level run defender. So you have a good defensive line. It's more about shoring up what is behind them. And there's also Shaquille Leonard, who might just be the highest overall at normal development in this game, and he can fly around and be a great run defender, not the best in coverage. At corner, there is Julius Brents. He's a rookie, 6'3", but 88 speed, not great in man coverage, a little bit limited there. The Colts defense can need some work, and you've got to find a little bit more, I think, to put around Anthony Richardson. Overall, this team has already put some money into their front seven and their offensive line, but I think you'll still have plenty of cap space to give Anthony Richardson a bit more help. Just a couple years ago, they won the Super Bowl, but the LA Rams are now on the other side of that entire process, where they traded for all these fantastic players, they had a great team, and went on to win the Super Bowl. That team is already a shell of what it was just a couple years ago. Matthew Stafford was hurt last season, and now he's a 75 overall at 35 years old. You've got to find the next quarterback in LA. Cooper Kupp is here, and he's one of the best receivers in the NFL. And he can provide a lot of easy targets for whatever quarterback you end up trying to develop, as he's one of the best route runners in the entire game. But outside of Cooper Kupp, there ain't a lot to work with offensively. There's some solid players like Cam Akers, but he's not a top 10 running back, not even close. There's Van Jefferson and Tutu Atwell, but there's also a subpar offensive line. There's not a lot of depth. You've essentially got to start rebuilding around an entirely new core. Your quarterback and your two best players on the entire team are all in their 30s. Aaron Donald is the best defensive player in football, but look at the defense around him. I think you've got to go in the opposite direction now with this roster and look to trade Aaron Donald at some point, and maybe Cooper Kupp as well. I think it'd be pretty challenging to try to build another winner with those two still around. Not impossible, because they won't regress super quickly. They're two of the best players in the game with X-Factor development, but the needs on this team are literally every position group. I don't think there's a single position I would say is a strength. There's two superstar players, that's about it. The Rams have not made a first-round pick since 2016 when they selected Jared Goff. They own their next first-round pick finally, and that can be used to start the next rebuild for the Rams. And you'll have plenty of cap space, most likely. On we go to the NFC South and the Carolina Panthers. I have pretty much recommended the Panthers year in, year out because I'm just a fan of their roster, but it's still working towards being playoff caliber. And this year they finally got aggressive and moved all the way up to number 1, selecting Alabama quarterback Bryce Young. He is a quarterback that you should have no issue developing. He has good accuracies, excellent mobility, just maybe not the strongest arm, but there's plenty to work with there. And there's some offensive line help already on this roster. Ike Ekwonu is in just his second year, and I think he'll be a cornerstone player. They have another good tackle in Taylor Moton, so that's one less spot to worry about. But they spent their offseason replacing Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore with veterans from other teams. Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, Miles Sanders, Hayden Hurst, all these guys have come over, but I'd be focusing more so on Jonathan Mingo, and I think there's a really good chance to develop him. And given his route runnings are in a nice spot, like you could turn him into a slot, turn him into a deep threat. You can get creative with Mingo. But for sure, this is a great team if you want to just draft like running backs and receivers. The quarterback's there, offensive line is mostly there, so it's a fun skill position team to work on. And then defensively, I like their best players a lot. Brian Burns is a star edge rusher, although they haven't signed him yet to a massive extension, so you'll probably want to get around to that, although I don't think he has high motivation in coming back in game. Derek Brown was a first-round pick of theirs a couple of years ago, and that gives them a really solid, well-rounded player in the middle of their defensive line. J.C. Horn was a first-round pick a couple years back, and he has everything you need to be a number 1 cornerback and one of the best in the NFL. And then a player that I'm a fan of, Jeremy Chin. He's a versatile safety who can play slot, linebacker, another really athletic and versatile player. This is the kind of team where if you drafted really well for a couple of years, you could have a Super Bowl contender pretty quickly. There's a lot of good pieces in place, but their weaknesses are fairly weak. There are a lot of normal dev players that aren't going to make a huge difference, and no first-round pick after your first year does provide a bit of a challenge, forcing you to likely look into free agency for some of your potential fixes, or finding the steal of the draft in the second or third round. This next team's a weird one. The Las Vegas Raiders have an odd roster construction. Let's get into this team. So, no longer do they have Derek Carr. They brought over Jimmy Garoppolo. That's still kind of a really weird situation to me. And when you think of the Raiders, you know they've got Devontae Adams now and Josh Jacobs, and that's exciting. Colton Miller is really good, but this is far from a complete team, and they're really reliant on those stars. Jimmy Garoppolo can be your quarterback in the short term, but I think putting a winner around him is going to be tough. It feels like you're in a race against the clock with this team because Devontae Adams is already 30, and there are big needs on both sides of the football. You can definitely put a really good offense on the field probably very early around Adams and Jacobs, but will it be enough in that AFC West? You'll certainly need Michael Mayer to come in and develop pretty quickly and to get some production out of Jacoby Myers. Hunter Renfrow is also a solid player, but the offensive line needs a lot of work, and defensively, outside of their pass rush situation, I don't really like it. Max Crosby is great, would be better if his tattoos were in the game, but that's another high-level player that you get to use. The Raiders have high-level talent in a lot of the right spots. Pass rusher, receiver, left tackle. But I just don't know if that's enough to really carry a team. Tyree Wilson, across from Max Crosby long-term, that sounds like an awesome tandem. And there's also Chandler Jones, the veteran who's 33 years old. Again, going back to this whole race against the clock, because some of your best players are already in their 30s, but you've got weaknesses along the O-line, in the secondary. Your quarterback in Jimmy G is just all right. It's the AFC. I don't know if this gets it done. But I think that's exactly what makes them fun for a rebuild, trying to put those pieces in place before those players regress and eventually move on, and within a few years you might end up with a totally new core. Given how much money they've been spending, I think you've really got to focus on fixing this team through the draft. That'll bring us to our 7th and final full team breakdown today. It's the Atlanta Falcons. If you want to know why, look at the last 3 first-round picks they have made. This is a video game offense. If you can develop Desmond Ridder or find the right quarterback, that'll just finish everything off. And I think you can work with Ridder. He's only 24 with star development. I do think that you can turn him into your franchise quarterback. But you're going to be having most of your fun likely with Bijan Robinson. These running backs that are special and really separate themselves in the draft, they're always going to go early. Teams can't help themselves when a guy like Bijan Robinson falls into their lap. Oh, and that's just a couple years after they selected Kyle Pitts in the first round, one of the best tight end prospects to come out of the draft. He has incredible athleticism, is basically a wide receiver, and I can guarantee you'll find a way to use him in your passing game. And then Drake London was their first round pick in 2022, and I think you can develop him into a solid like Keenan Allen type of receiver, good slot route runner, but I think London can do a little bit of everything. They've got some players along the offensive line. Chris Lindstrom is probably the best or one of the best run blocking guards in the game, so there's no reason why you wouldn't have fun building an offense here in Atlanta. It'd be pretty tough to not have fun playing with Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts. We go to the defense. Atlanta's defense is never great, but they have a few players here that really stand out. You got Grady Jarrett, who's 30 years old, and he's someone you'll have to think about, trading, how long he's going to play at this level for you. They signed Calais Campbell. He probably retires after year 1, but at least right away, he and Grady Jarrett can help solidify the defensive line a little bit. And then in the secondary, Jesse Bates was brought over from the Cincinnati Bengals, and he's just a really good free safety. And you've also got one of the best young cornerbacks in the NFL in A.J. Terrell, and he's only 24 years old with outstanding, well-rounded skills. Outside of their standouts, there's a lot of work to do with this defense. They seemingly always need edge rushers, and the secondary still needs more, I feel, at cornerback. But they play in a weak division, the NFC South, and I think you can look to establish control there with your standouts offensively. And you're going to have cap space as well to continue building that team up. The Falcons are one of my favorite choices in this game. That's why I saved them for last. But if none of these teams, solve the problem for you, I recommend looking more at some of the mid-tier teams. Some of these teams like New Orleans, Pittsburgh, New England, they're going to provide you with a good team, but questions about if it's Super Bowl caliber. And maybe with some of the older players on these rosters, after a few years, you start to turn the team over, and then maybe more of a full-scale rebuild begins. The mid-tier is often unexplored for franchise, and I think there's a ton of opportunities here for unique challenges. The Saints spend a ton of money, but don't really have a Super Bowl caliber roster. The Patriots are just middle of the road, like everywhere on offense. I don't think that gets it done in the AFC. This might be good enough for the NFC South, but nowhere in the AFC does that win anything. Their defense is pretty good. Christian Gonzalez is one of my favorite players in the draft, and I like their secondary overall. But a lot of these mid-tier teams, especially in the AFC, to me are intriguing. Because if you're just looking for a challenge, some of these teams that have good players, you've still got to go up against the best teams in the NFL. You're still going to have to grind to go and win a Super Bowl. And the AFC is just in a spot right now where if you even just win your division and go against those teams in the wild card, they're going to be stacked. Like between the Bengals and Ravens, only one can win that division. The Patriots are the 4th most intriguing team right now in the AFC East, and they don't even have a bad roster. Like, there's just so much talent right now in the AFC. If you just pick a random team there, you're probably set. And one little thing I want to say here before I wrap up today's video, I do recommend in franchise mode, unfortunately for the third straight year, to turn off progressive fatigue because I don't think they've implemented it properly. Players late in the season will just disappear from games, and I'm just not a fan of how they've handled this feature. I had high hopes in the beginning. They have not been met. But that's going to do it for this video, everybody. I hope that I've helped solve your question as to who you should use in franchise this year. I've thought about just making a video where I do a quick elevator pitch on all 32 teams, because there are so many good choices, including teams I didn't even talk about in this video. But that's going to do it for me. Let me know what you thought of the teams down below in the comments section. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all in the next video. Have a great day.